My first experience with The Witcher 3 was actually with the Monster Hunter World crossover DLC, where you play as Geralt and you fight a Leshen. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I kind of hated it. There's multiple instances where you come across signs of the Leshen's presence, and you're given either different dialogue or investigation options, but then you have to pick all of them anyway to proceed. You can't proceed until you've listened to everything that's said from all of these options. It's like, what's the point of even giving me the option in the first place if I'm just gonna have to listen to it all anyway? Geralt's dialogue kind of bothered me. He talks like he's missing like 1 or 2 words from the start of every sentence. I don't know if that's just me, but that's how I've always felt. Maybe there's a lore reason for that. Is that a Witcher thing? The lip syncing was really bad.
Revoltures. They're scavenger birds that enjoy large monsters' leftovers. They're usually harmless.
And then the fight with the Leshen itself might have been the least fun I've ever had in Monster Hunter World. This thing just would not die. The fight went on forever, and it felt like it was constantly teleporting away from you, never really allowing you to get any substantial damage on it, and it was just such a drag. And I just remember thinking to myself, man, is this what the Witcher games are like? Because this DLC did not do it for me. Well, in the past month or so, I've gotten to find out firsthand. I was looking for a big time sink, so I bought myself the game for Christmas. Why not, right? This game is held in such high esteem. So many people have such a high opinion of it. You hear so many amazing things about it. It's got Game of the Year 2015. Many consider it to be Game of the Decade, so I figured, you know, a little bit late, but I might as well just hop on board and see what all the fuss is about. And it'd definitely be fair to say that this game took me on a ride, not just in-game, but also as someone who likes to analyze games and often critiques them. So yeah, let's just jump into it. Oh, jeez. Oh, okay. Never mind. Let's gently walk into it. I see. Okay, let's just slowly and carefully slide into it. Okay, let's just start. Keep in mind that everything you're hearing in this video is coming from the mouth of someone whose first Witcher game was The Witcher 3, and also from the mouth of someone who started playing it for the first time in late 2019 and finished it in early 2020. So I'll just get this out of the way. I really like The Witcher 3. I think it's very good, but I do also think it has some blatant issues that I never really hear get talked about. So, for instance, for the first few hours of The Witcher 3, I hated it. I think that White Orchard is not a very good introduction to the game, and I generally think the first few hours are pretty lackluster. Because The Witcher 3 is intended as an open world RPG, right? And in these first few hours, it feels like you get to engage with very little of both of those things, especially the open world. I get that because White Orchard is the first area in the game, they want to keep it small and simple so as not to overwhelm the player, but it also doesn't have to be entirely uninteresting, right? But should you stray away from the main quest and side quests and have a look around for yourself, you're going to find pretty much the same thing over and over again. Monster dens, bandit camps, places of power. That's all I ever ran into in this whole area. On my first go, that is. That's not, you know, not that I combed around the whole place in my first playthrough. There's a contract very early on to fight a wraith, which is a unique kind of enemy, and how you fight it isn't really well explained to you. Maybe that's just me, but I had a lot of trouble with this my first go around. I was told the oils would be helpful, so I went to make an oil, saw that I was missing an ingredient, had no idea where to find that ingredient or how to get it, and so I just kind of had to walk away frustratedly. And perhaps what made it more frustrating was that the couple of times that I died to this thing, I had to wait quite a long time. The loading screens in this game, especially when you're reloading your save after you've just died, are pretty brutal. But I don't think anything in this game is quite as brutal as its controls, which I would say are its single biggest issue. Okay, maybe its second biggest issue. Frankly, I find The Witcher 3's controls to be very clunky. The first few hours, I really had to think about what I was doing, and that's a sign of not great controls. You know, controls should be mindless, they should be subconscious. You should just do them without having to actively, consciously think of them. But The Witcher 3's controls are kind of all over the place. So for example, I don't know whose idea it was to have it so that you assign signs, I'm playing on PS4 by the way, assign signs with the left shoulder button and use them with the right trigger. That just feels so awkward to me. And I'm not necessarily saying that having it so that you assign signs with one bumper and then use them with the same trigger is the solution. It might feel better. I'm just saying that there must surely have been a better way to configure the usage of signs in this game. Just spitballing off the top of my head. Maybe if you hold the bumper button, that brings up the wheel, and then if you tap the button, that uses the sign. That sounds way better to me, right? Then there's consumables, which you can can equip to like an upwards and downwards slot, so you can use them with the up or down on the D-pad, and you can have up to 2 items equipped on those slots. And if you want to swap out the items that you've got on those slots, you need to again bring up the wheel that you use to assign signs and use secondary items like quest items and the crossbow, and then hold the button on the D-pad that you have them equipped to swap the consumables. That feels so unnecessarily complicated. I'm not saying that these controls are unintuitive, but I am saying that if I stole my mum's Amazon Alexa and somehow found a way to hardwire it to my PS4 and then asked Alexa to cast Igni for me, it probably would have made more sense my first time round. So as you can imagine, from all these things combined, I really wasn't enjoying myself in the first few hours of The Witcher 3, and in fact I very heavily considered selling it. At the time, all of the criticisms that I had for The Witcher 3 based on the Monster Hunter World DLC that I'd played were correct. I had been given multiple options only to have to pick all of them to proceed, and Geralt again seemed to be missing the first word of every sentence he spoke. Surely this can't just be me. I can't be going crazy. This bothers me so much.
Need to get to Skellige.
Not on this boat, you won't.
Pay you well.
I haven't even talked about the combat yet, which, for all intents and purposes, is pretty lacking, because it feels like it can be exploited so easily. The strat is, get your hits in, dodge or roll away, get back in the fight, get your hits in, and do it again, and rinse repeat, and you can win basically any fight in the game with this strategy. Also, you can't jump during combat. The game's control scheme changes when it considers you to be in combat, which means sometimes you can just unintentionally get locked into an arena or a small area and with no escape, and it's really frustrating. Yeah, things weren't looking good, but I stuck it out, and eventually I made it to the second area of the game, Felon, and it was when I completed the quest called Ladies of the Wood, which is this very long main story quest which is intertwined with the Bloody Baron quest, which is said by a lot of people to be the big kind of turning on point that keeps people hooked and gets people invested in the game long term. That, yeah, I kind of got it, you know? I was having this climactic final conversation with the crones, and the more I spoke to them and the more decisions I was able to make throughout this quest and in dialogue, the more I started to slowly get hooked, and by the time I was finished, I very vividly remember thinking to myself, okay, that was really cool. The Witcher 3 is an open world RPG that is quite deeply flawed in both departments in my opinion, because as far as role playing is concerned, playing as Geralt, a character who has been built up over the past 2 games and already has a predetermined backstory and personality, kind of hampers how much you can roleplay. You get to make a lot of good, interesting decisions in this game, but you're always still Geralt, right? And as far as the open world is concerned, CD Projekt Red have created this absolutely gorgeous, detailed overworld that excels in excellent environmental storytelling, but also one that when you're traveling, you won't actually be looking at very much, and you won't actually be appreciating the absolute beauty of this open world because of that white dotted line that is guiding you with such ease to the next objective. Your eye is basically going to have to be trained on this white dotted line the whole time because it's leading you straight to the quest markers and straight to the objectives. And there's multiple ways that this minimap will very quickly become completely filled up with points of interest and markers for treasure and locations and side quests that kind of spoil the fun of discovery for you. So exploration feels more like a checklist, like you're just kind of checking stuff off, and not only is most of the stuff you could potentially discover on your own already marked for you on this map, but the things that you will discover on your own before they're marked on your map are generally just minor things. There's not a lot of crazy interesting stuff to be found in the open world of The Witcher. There's a lot of bandit camps, monster dens, smugglers' treasures, abandoned sites, a couple caves and ruins here and there, generally a lot of the same stuff. And yet, it's so enrapturing because of the writing and because of the quests, in my opinion. The writing and quests in this game absolutely demolish every other game in this genre. I think that Breath of the Wild, which is a game that gets compared to The Witcher 3 quite a lot for obvious reasons, totally trumps The Witcher 3 in its open world. Not just because of the whole minimap problem, but also because I think the things that you find in Breath of the Wild's overworld are far more interesting and far more diverse. And then a game like Dragon Age Inquisition that I'd played shortly before I played The Witcher 3, which I actually think is more comparable to Witcher 3 than a lot of people realise. It's got persecution against mages, its villain is a massive wet fart, there's a magical elf at the end who you're pretty sure has betrayed you, but they do play out very differently in the end. I think did role-playing quite a lot better. Not just because I was playing playing as a self-insert character, and I had more range of emotions and motivations to show off in my dialogue options, but also because of how much more customizable my character felt with skill trees and level ups and upgrades and all this stuff. I think Witcher 3's level up and upgrade system is fine, but it's nothing amazing. It doesn't really feel like there's a whole ton of different potential playstyles. There's like 3 or 4. Not to mention that in Dragon Age, it felt like there was a whole lot more potential for my relationships with the characters in the game to change comparatively, as well as my general role in the world. And while I do think the Inquisition's writing and characters and lore and world building are pretty much right up there with The Witcher 3, even that game's main quests can't hold a candle to what The Witcher 3 accomplishes, and Breath of the Wild, narratively, is just not even in the same league. Some of these main quests feel absolutely monolithic. They are the complete culmination of the writing and characters and world building on display in this game. Quests like the Bloody Baron and Get Junior could very reasonably take you up to a full day's worth of gameplay, maybe even more if you're going through it blind for the first time. But man, the decisions that you get to make throughout these quests and the twists and turns that they take are so fascinating. I think The Witcher 3 has given me more fascinating decisions than any other game I've ever played, barring maybe Fallout New Vegas, which I hold in very high regard. I also really love the timed dialogue choices and decisions that you have to make. They force the most primal form of role-playing, right? Like, what is your instinct? Make a decision now. I would love to see more of that in games. There's an excellent level of moral ambiguity and complexity to almost every character and quest in the game. Almost never at the end of an important quest you get a good guy decision or a bad guy decision. It's constantly complex, and I had to think over my decision for minutes on end quite a few times throughout this game, and it kind of illuminates how badly games have handled moral ambiguity and complexity before. So many role-playing games just have like a karma system, and it's like be good or be bad, you know? But I genuinely didn't know if I made the right decision in The Witcher 3 quite a lot of times. The Ladies of the Wood quest that I mentioned earlier culminates with you deciding the fate of a bunch of swamp kids, and it's basically like, leave them with these clearly evil witches, or free an evil tree spirit and let him possess a horse and run away with them. And I remember after the quest just being like, what have I done? There's a quest where your friend, or friend with benefits, Triss, offers to surrender herself to the people that are looking for the mages so that you can get inside their headquarters and question the leader on the whereabouts of your friend who you're looking for main story purposes, under the impression that you'll go in, get the information you need, and then break out just like that. But it doesn't quite go right, because she gets taken into a room and tortured, and the whole time that you're having the conversation with this guy and trying to extract information, you're having to listen to her literally have her fingernails pulled out in the room next to you, and you're constantly given the option to just say, nope, I can't take this anymore, screw this, and try and fight the entire building's worth of guys so that she isn't getting tortured anymore. But you obviously also risk not getting that valuable information and just losing the fight because you're vastly outnumbered. This part of the game genuinely got my heart going a little bit. It got a real emotional response out of me. I was tense, I was nervous, I felt awful for Triss. It's just another example of the excellent levels of depth, complexity, and tension that these main quests have. You're not going to be spoon-fed easy decisions, you're going to have to live with your decisions. And decisions are a defining factor in The Witcher 3's quality, in my opinion. Early on in Velen, I ran into this guy who had his hands tied behind his back and there were drowners nearby about to kill him. So I dealt with the drowners and spoke to him and asked him who he was. He gave me a bit of backstory and I made the decision to untie him. He said that unfortunately he didn't have anything to give me at the time, but he said that he was grateful at the very least. Way later in the game, I'm talking hours down the line, on the outskirts of Novigrad, I ran into him again, but he had a bunch of knight friends with him and it looked like he'd gotten all his stuff back together. He was looking well, and he recognized me and said, hey man, it's great to see you. You saved my life. I'm willing to give you some money for it now. But very nearby, him and his boys were the corpses of some refugees, and Geralt surmises that he must have gotten the money from the refugees. It seems like you freed kind of a bad dude. And then again, you get the decision to just take the money and leave, or you can now fight this guy and kill him. It's really interesting stuff. As someone who has never once in real life reaped the long-term benefits of a decision made long ago, this was refreshing. And coincidentally, Megan, if you're watching this, please text me. Megan, I'm begging you, please. Megan, please! It was these layered and comprehensive main quests and the ways that my seemingly insignificant decisions came back to me in a big way that kept me hooked. And it was around this time, late in Velen and early into Novigrad, that I got properly hooked and really started to see the appeal of The Witcher. And eventually it gets to a point where the mainstream appeal of The Witcher 3 is just so plain to see. I mean, it is basically just an amalgamation of everything that everyone has ever liked ever. It's a game about playing as Batman in Game of Thrones while simultaneously banging the entire female cast of medieval friends. And while I stand by that playing as medieval Batman does hold the game's role-playing back quite a lot, The Witcher 3 also kind of made me question how I view RPGs and challenge the way that I defined them in the RPG video that I made a few months ago. Because I've always been telling myself that for a game to be a true RPG in my eyes, your character has to be quite customizable. You have to be able to have an influence on elements of their backstories and their relationships, and certainly more influence over the role that you play in the world than you do over Geralt in The Witcher. Because while you can make different decisions with Geralt, you're still playing within this kind of sphere of Geralt. You know, you're never given any options that are that out of character for him. But what The Witcher 3 made me realize is that that's actually okay. Yes, I do think if there was a way to customize a character in this world, or basically not play as Geralt and self-insert yourself into this world, it would be a better RPG. But the decisions you make as Geralt and relating to Geralt's character and relationships are still interesting. The role that you're playing in this game is just Geralt, but that's okay. I think CD Projekt Red have done about as good a job as they possibly could with making an RPG out of a very well established character. Conversely, while I maintain that the open world exploration and the open world in general is very flawed because the minimap and HUD give you way too much information and there really aren't that many unique, interesting things to discover, The Witcher 3 has this really cool option where you can turn the HUD off entirely and completely immerse yourself in the world. Now, I haven't played myself like this, and I imagine it would generally be very hard because a lot of the time you're kind of just told to go to a place, and the only reason that you can find it is because of that minimap. So I think it's probably very flawed without the minimap and HUD as well, but you know, it's not an option that a lot of games give you, and I imagine it's very fascinating to play the entire game without the HUD and really learn the layout of the world. This game generally has very comprehensive options. You can make it so that enemies automatically upscale and level equally to you, which is really cool for the sake of difficulty, because if you don't do that, you can get pretty over leveled pretty quickly. You can change the difficulty at any time. The Witcher 3 just has a lot of really cool customization options. So while I maintain that The Witcher 3 is quite a flawed open world RPG, there's definitely a lot of counterpoints to that, and there's definitely a lot of reasons that people could use to say that it actually does both things really well. I wouldn't say that, but you know, they're flawed but still good and enjoyable enough. Generally, The Witcher 3's gameplay and systems and mechanics are kind of just good enough as a game in a vacuum. I think The Witcher 3 is pretty average. Combat is pretty average, exploration is pretty average, the UI and menus feel kind of clunky as well, but The Witcher 3 as an experience, maybe you've heard this a lot, so I'm sorry if this is a cliche, but it is one of those games that I think is way more of an experience than it is a game. It's carried pretty hard in my opinion by the decisions and narrative elements, so with that in mind, let's talk a bit more about the main quests and the story overall. So if you've heard the phrase good in concept and bad in execution, then flip that around for The Witcher 3, because I think The Witcher 3 is a really weird example, a very rare example of a game that in concept its story is not very interesting. In fact, the main story of The Witcher 3 is basically one massive fetch quest with constant diversions. The whole plot of the game is to find Ciri because the Wild Hunt are after her and she has some crazy time and space magical powers, and if they get her, then it could be very, very dangerous for the rest of the world. So about 80% of the game's main quest is just tracking down lead after lead, and then this guy I want you to do a favor for him in exchange for information, and this guy I want you to do a favor for him in exchange for information, and then before you know it, you're in a tree talking to a demon, and you're on a pirate island helping them decide their next ruler. So while the story itself is conceptually not that interesting, it manages to stay fresh by taking you to a lot of interesting places and constantly throwing new interesting concepts for quests at you, even if occasionally the distractions and diversions can feel a bit much. However, The Witcher 3 does suffer from a really bad case. Oh, this is it, Brad. This is what 8 weeks of university game design and theory have been building up to. Woo! The Witcher 3 suffers from a bad case of ludonarrative dissonance. Woo! To put it simply, for the uninitiated Neanderthals, ludonarrative dissonance is basically when there's a conflict between the game's story and the game's gameplay. Think, for example, a lot of the GTA games, right? You're playing generally as like a criminal or a mobster, but you're not a psychopath, you're not a mass murderer, but in your free time you can just mow anyone down and shoot anyone on the street. The Witcher 3's plot is a desperate search to find Ciri. If the Wild Hunt get their hands on her, it could be catastrophic for the whole world. You have to find her by any means necessary and as fast as humanly possible. But also, does anyone want to play some Gwent? Yo, horse racing? Yeah, I'm down for some horse racing. Yo, hold up, there are some statues and they've fallen over? I'm on it. This should be a lot more jarring than it is, but the world, for all its problems as far as exploration is concerned, is so nice to just be in. It's so well realized. I think the only thing aside from that huge HUD that really holds me back from being completely immersed in this game's world was the pretty spotty voice acting. Some of the voice acting is really good. Characters like Yennefer and pretty much all of the dwarves in the game were performed really well, but then there's characters like Ciri, who I think is mostly good, but occasionally it feels like she's trying too hard to sound young. You probably won't get what I mean if you haven't played the game. The narrator, I don't know what's up with the narrator's delivery and cadence, but sometimes it feels like he's really rushing through his lines.
Geralt learned that Cirilla, his one-time ward, had returned from afar, and she was in danger. He was to find her, at the Emperor's command and Yennefer's behest.
And sometimes it just sounds like he's half asleep.
There was no time to rejoice, for the Wild Hunt descended on them. They fled, Ciri teleporting them to Kaer Morhen, where their friends awaited. The Wild Hunt arrived at Kaer Morhen soon after. A great battle ensued, and the fortress's defenders might all have perished had Ciri not demonstrated her powers. So sudden and violent was her outburst that the Wild Hunt was forced to withdraw. The battle was won, the war had barely started.
Geralt went to fight another monster and they did a thing, and now he's looking for Ciri. And then there's this one side quest, a pretty cool side quest, where you're having to try and track down a serial killer in Novigrad. Shock horror, it turns out to be one of the 2 new characters who are introduced to you in that side quest. And this guy is a monster. He has killed people in some of the most brutal and torturous ways possible, and he's also attacked your friend Dandelion's newest girlfriend Priscilla and forced her to ingest acid to try and like target her voice because she's a bard. Really messed up stuff. And when you find out that it's the former lecturer of the doctor who's taking care of her, not just that, but that he is a vampire and you have to fight him and kill him in this dramatic final fight in a warehouse, when you go back and tell the doctor, he basically just gives you the medieval version of like, damn bro, that's whack. That's more of a scripting problem than a voice acting problem, I guess, but it does sometimes feel like the voice actors aren't really willing to commit to dramatic performances, and a lot of the quests that should be dramatic otherwise kind of just end and the character's like, whoa, no way. Alright, here's some money, bye. Shani from the Hearts of Stone DLC? What is that accent supposed to be?
He's certainly useful to them. A specialist in black magic and the occult? Must be a trove of knowledge.
If he's really gone off his nutter. If he's really gone off his nutter. Off his nutter. Off his nutter. Off his nutter.
Huh? On the subject of voices and talking and dialogue, The Witcher 3 generally does a pretty good job at not falling into that RPG trap of telling you that your dialogue option or your decision is going to be one thing and then having your character actually do something completely different that you never could have predicted when you chose it. But there is one particularly egregious example of it not getting this right at all that comes to mind. Shove Dijkstra aside forcefully.
Sorry, can't let that happen.
No! No, my leg!
Yeah, that's what I wanted. This option, there's no way of knowing it when you pick it. But not only is this option completely inaccurate to what it tells you, but it also shuts off a really important quest about assassinating the king. Breaking this guy's leg when the game told you that you were gonna push him aside forcefully makes it so that you can't assassinate the evil king in the game. Like, how are you supposed to predict that, right? There's another similar thing with the character of Kira. I can't remember the specifics, but I remember we got into a bit of an argument at the end of her quest chain because she was kind of manipulating me to try and get to some information that she really wanted. And I argued with her about it because I was like, hey, that's not cool, don't do that. And then the next thing I know, we're in a fight and I've killed her. And I'm like, whoa, that really escalated quickly. Dijkstra, for the record, is my favorite character in the game. He's an example of amazing voice acting. His relationship and his banter back and forth with Geralt is so good. His writing is so good. I didn't break Dijkstra's leg on my playthrough because I really liked him and I wanted to stay on good terms with him. He's such an interesting and fun and well-written character, right up until the end of that quest where you kill the king. It's been established that Dijkstra is a smart guy. He's a spy master, and there's a line during like your planning for the assassination that implies that he and another character, Tala, know that they're not good at fighting, so they're just going to stay in the background and do things from the shadows. It's also canonical that Geralt has broken his leg before previously, like before you get the option to shove him aside again. So Dijkstra should know that he can't beat Geralt in a fight, but at the end of this mission where you kill the king, you go back to the rendezvous point and he turns on you and your co-conspirators, one of them being Vernon Roach, who is a longtime friend of yours who literally put his life on the line fighting alongside you at Kaer Morhen, and you get the decision to just walk away and let Dijkstra kill both of your friends, like I say, one of them who literally put his life on the line for you, or to side with them and kill Dijkstra. This is not a choice. Dijkstra is suddenly being the objective bad guy here. It's not a choice, right? This is not, nobody is going to pick the walk away option. And even then, it's also not becoming of his character at all. He's supposed to be smart. Why is he suddenly doing something so stupid and picking a fight with a trained soldier who is one of Geralt's best friends in front of Geralt when he's supposed to know that he can't beat Geralt in a fight? Apparently it's because he assumes that Geralt will be neutral? Come on. It's such a shame to see such an otherwise cool and interesting character go down like this and get such an unsatisfying and unbecoming ending, but keep in mind that this is absolutely an exception to the rule. For the most part, The Witcher 3's story arcs and quests have very satisfying endings that make sense. These are only some of the absolute worst examples of the writing and decision making, which are the two strongest factors of The Witcher, kind of falling apart. But I think it needs to be said that, you know, for a game as absolutely gargantuan as The Witcher 3, it's really impressive that it doesn't have more flaws, honestly, because this game is so ambitious and so huge, and, you know, it really doesn't get very many things outright wrong. There's a few things that are flawed and kind of rough around the edges, but there's very little about The Witcher that I think you could ever really say is outright bad. It's just one of those games that you can say you don't like totally, but to say that it's outright bad in any objective sense, I would think is pretty crazy. I think the game goes slightly overrated in some circles. It wouldn't be my game of the decade. Actually, on my Patreon, I wrote a top 10 games of the decade list, and while I was quite a bit of a way into The Witcher 3, I put it at 10, but now that I've finished it, I'd probably bump it up a little bit more, maybe even around like the 8 area. I think 8 sounds good. Though, to be fair, if I went into this game blind when it first came out in 2015 and experienced everything at the time alongside everyone else, I can totally see me having a very different opinion on this game and it having the exact same effect on me that it had on so many of the people who now call it game of the decade. Even 5 years later, having already known quite a few things about it, I was still really impressed, you know? As I say, as cliche as it may be, as a game, I think The Witcher 3 is just okay, but as an experience, as a narrative experience, you know, as something to immerse yourself in, yeah, it's sublime. It really is so good in so many ways. The visuals and soundtrack, I really can't believe I haven't talked about this yet, but this game is obviously beautiful in both regards. This is a 2015 game that totally holds up 5 years later. It will probably continue to look extremely good for years to come because it feels like this game was very graphically ahead of its time. The soundtrack is obviously great. There's a lot of great songs. This game is just presented very well, and 5 years later, it totally holds up. It feels like a game that could be released right now in 2020 and would be totally up to snuff. It's a game that I think is going to age very well, and it's going to be a long time before we feel like The Witcher 3 is a relic of the past. And despite the very rocky start, I really wound up enjoying it way more than I thought I was gonna. Also, I guess the DLC is worth a mention. Hearts of Stone is really cool narratively. It introduces one of the most existentially terrifying villains in anything ever, and Blood and Wine. Do you ever look at something in a video game and think, like, this looks so good, it's like, it's better quality than my eyes eyes. Do you ever think that? I think that's probably really weirdly specific, and maybe that's just me, but I think almost that exact phrase to myself quite a lot, and I get it big time when I'm playing Blood and Wine. I'll just be looking out at like any view or expanse in Tucson, and I'll just, in my head, I'll just be like, this is better quality than my eyes. Anyway, there it is. The Witcher 3 analysis. Yep, that's it. Thank you very much to my £10 patrons, Mr. Michael Craig, Mr. Andy Angel, and Mr. Canary Bird. Beautiful, beautiful, handsome men, and I'm going to give them all a big kiss on the lips the next time I see them. Thanks to all my patrons in general. The support really, really means a lot. If you want to support me and do the Patreon thing, then there's a link in the description, as there always will be. You know, all the classic YouTube person stuff. Also, February is probably going to be pretty quiet from me. I've very consistently uploaded 2 videos every month since October. A lot of them 20+ minute, and in some cases even 30+ minute big analyses videos. And as I kind of alluded to in my last video, this whole critical analysis thing, you know, it was never the sole intention of my channel. And even if just for a bit, I want to go back to doing some sillier, stupider, more fun stuff. So you'll probably get something like that in February and not much else. But I will obviously be back to the regular schedule from March onwards. I just need a bit of time to kind of recharge creatively. And so with that, I am gonna get out of here. Aww.